I wish I could say that all the biggest stories from the NBA playoffs this year have been about stuff that's happened on the court. Because there have been some incredible games and a few really outstanding performances so far, and there will probably be more. But then there's this guy. Even though he hasn't played a minute since last June and his team was unceremoniously swept out of the first round by the Celtics, I think we're going to be talking about Ben Simmons for a while. Simmons was the centerpiece of the package that the Nets got in return for James Harden, which seemed like a good thing for pretty much everyone involved. The Sixers got a future Hall of Famer and a bona fide alpha in James Harden, and Simmons got to leave Philadelphia, where he was never the most popular player and hadn't really been having a good time for quite a while. It seemed like the right deal at the right time to get his career back on track, but a few months out, it hasn't really worked out that way. After being out for the entire regular season, Simmons looked close to returning to help the Nets in their first round series against the Celtics. It seemed like a done deal that he'd be back for Game 4, and down 3-0, the Nets really needed him. But a re-aggravation of a back injury meant that it was just another false start. Simmons was ruled out yet again, the Nets were swept, and even more questions around Simmons and his future in the NBA were being asked. Some of them didn't sound like questions so much as insinuations or even outright accusations, but that's kind of become par for the course as far as Ben Simmons is concerned. It's been nothing but stops, starts, and frustration for Simmons, the Nets, and heck, even the Sixers for the past year. And it seems like we're no closer to finding an answer on when it'll all just go back to normal. Ostensibly, Simmons missed the series with the Celtics because of a back injury. But there's also been a lot of discussion over how his long-term struggles with mental health may or may not have played into that. And although there are already a lot of Ben Simmons takes out there in the world, because this is a sports psychology channel, I thought it might be helpful to explore what's been going on with this guy from that side of things. Because no matter what your background is, it's hard not to look at this case and think, what the heck is going on here? Now, before we get too deep into this, I just want to say up front that I'm only going to be approaching this based on the stuff that I know. I have a master's degree in psychology. Not trying to brag, it's just a fact, but I don't have a master's degree in knowing Ben Simmons. So everything I'm about to say is going to be framed in terms of what might be happening. But when I see tweets like this from people with hundreds of thousands of followers, it becomes abundantly clear that there's a lot people don't know about mental illness and the effects it can have. Just as an aside, this tweet haunts me at a deep emotional level and is about half the reason I wanted to do this video in the first place. To try and do our best to understand what's going on with Ben Simmons now, we have to back up a little and get the whole picture. Simmons was born and raised in Australia, but came out of Montverde Academy in Florida as the #1 recruit in the entire country. From there, it was on to LSU, where he wasn't the only good player on the team, but he was certainly the best player on the team, even as a freshman. LSU finished 19-14 and didn't make it to the tournament, which was pretty disappointing all things considered. But despite that, Simmons still finished as a first-team All-American and a finalist for the Wooden Award. Even if your team kind of stinks, averaging a double-double as a freshman in the SEC is probably good enough to keep your draft status intact. It certainly didn't dissuade the Sixers, who drafted Simmons with the first overall pick in 2016. It's hard to argue that he wasn't worthy of it, but once again, the burden of expectation was resting squarely on his young shoulders. But it wasn't his shoulders that ended up causing Simmons problems early on in his NBA career. It was actually his right foot, which he broke in the final practice of the Sixers training camp. After initially being ruled out for 3 or 4 months, the foot not healing properly meant that Simmons would miss the entirety of what was supposed to be his rookie season. He's certainly not the only first overall pick to miss a bunch of time right after he was drafted. Blake Griffin went through something pretty similar and turned out fine for him. But that injury process might have been the first bit of foreshadowing for how this most recent episode was going to go. By the start of the 2017 season, though, Simmons was fully healthy and played in 81 of the Sixers' 82 games on his way to winning Rookie of the Year. Philadelphia also won 52 games that season and made the playoffs for the first time since 2012, with Simmons in the top 3 for points, rebounds, and assists for the season. But then the playoffs happened, and that's where things start to get a little hairy. Ben Simmons has never been much of a shooter, or even a high-level scorer of any kind, but in the regular season, that's a little easier to mask. By 2019, the team had also added Tobias Harris and Jimmy Butler, so it wasn't even all that necessary for him to chip in with a bunch of points. But in the playoffs, you run into teams like Kawhi Leonard's Raptors, who have enough good players to guard those other guys, and to make a significant offensive contribution from Simmons not only necessary, but vital for the Sixers' success. He needed to shoot more and shoot better, but that's not really his game. And from his rookie year on, It became pretty clear that 1, the better teams in the Eastern Conference were going to keep forcing Ben Simmons to shoot, and that 2, that strategy was having a profound effect on him. From 2019 to 2021, his average points per game dropped noticeably from the regular season to the postseason, along with, weirdly, his shots per game. Just when the Sixers might have needed him to step up and score more points, Ben Simmons was trying to score even less than normal. It wasn't just that he couldn't shoot in the playoffs, he wouldn't shoot in the playoffs. And whether you want to chalk that up to his injury history, his ability, or his mental toughness or whatever, it started to really make Sixers fans mad. By the time they were eliminated by the Hawks in the second round in 2021, things had gotten downright ugly. There's a famous moment from Game 7 in that series where, with just a few minutes left to go and the Sixers down 2, Simmons passed up an opportunity for a pretty straightforward dunk. Like, he does all the hard stuff completely right. He backs down Danilo Gallinari, spins to the basket, but instead of just putting the ball in the net, which you'd think a nearly 7-foot-tall person would be comfortable doing, he passes the ball to Matisse Thybulle. And even though it's Thybulle that misses the layup and one of his free throws, it's Simmons who takes the heat for the fact that the Sixers never really got back in that game. It may have also had something to do with the fact that Simmons shot under 40% from the free throw line for that entire playoffs, but that's neither here nor there. In any case, that moment kind of sums up Simmons' last days with the Sixers, because there was no recovering from that perception with their fan base. Even though he'd been to 3 All-Star games in a Sixers uniform, Philadelphia was pretty much done with him, and they'd let him know about it on social media. And the feeling was mutual. Simmons requested a trade before the 2021 season started, citing the fact that he was struggling significantly with mental health problems, which he since said that had been going on since before that regular season even started. The 76ers offered their own staff mental health professionals to Simmons, but he declined, saying that he didn't feel comfortable with any of the team psychologists in the Sixers building. He sat out training camp and refused to play, which the 76ers did not like at all. They fined him for every game he missed, even though Simmons and his agent, Rich Paul, maintained that his absence from the team should be treated just like any physical injury would be. But the Sixers weren't buying it, and all in all, Ben Simmons forfeited nearly $20 million for sitting out before he was traded to the Nets. Which brings us back to this. And I know it may seem like I'm kind of fixated on this tweet, but that's only because it's completely accurate. I know that isn't healthy, but I can't help it. And I also know that continuing to share this tweet is pretty much exactly what he wanted in the first place, but here's the thing about that. I wish this was just a Howard Eskin problem. That would be so much easier to deal with, but the fact of the matter is that while they may not be blasting it out to the entire internet, lots of people share this opinion, or at least something like it, possibly including members of the Brooklyn Nets organization. As Simmons informed the Nets that he wouldn't be coming back for Game 4 against the Celtics, an article in The Athletic by Shams Charania details how members of the Nets team and coaching staff wanted Simmons to show a little more resolve in trying to come back and be a part of the team. It's more diplomatic than the Eskin argument, but it's still kinda Eskin-y. Eskin adjacent at the very least. But let me take a second to explain why all of that is wrong. Contrary to what the Sixers front office might have said last summer, we need to start treating mental illness a lot more like we do physical injuries. Just like broken feet and torn labrums, conditions like anxiety and depression keep athletes from performing at their best. And also like those injuries, their causes aren't always that mysterious. Ben Simmons wasn't just anxious because he felt like it, Howard. What do you mean, amazing how he was just fine once he left the Sixers? That was what was causing all the issues in the first place. That tweet might as well have read, "So much for his cancer. Amazing how that was just fine once they took the tumor out." That was the whole problem. I don't know Ben Simmons' diagnostic history, but if I had to guess, he appears to be exhibiting a form of performance anxiety, which, just like any other psychological disorder, presents in 3 different ways. These are known as the 3 Ds of diagnosis, beginning with deviance, or the degree to which a behavior strays outside of an established norm. And if a 7-foot-tall guy is opting not to dunk a basketball in an open hoop because he's anxious about it, or turning down tens of millions of dollars, that's definitely outside an established norm. The second criteria is dysfunction, which is how much a disorder impacts the daily functioning of the subject, which, in Ben Simmons' case, well, see the bit about the dunking and the fining and stuff. But the one I'm most interested in is distress, which is the emotional impact that dealing with disordered symptoms can have. Because when you've got problems with anxiety and you're having to deal with them in real time in front of a massive audience, your emotions are far from where it stops. When you're experiencing anxiety or stress, your body treats it the same way it would treat you being under physical attack. Your autonomic nervous system, which is involved in non-voluntary processes like breathing and circulating your blood, engages your fight or flight response, or your sympathetic nervous system. Your heart rate and breathing rate increase, your pupils can dilate, and most notably of all, when it comes to Ben Simmons, your muscles can spasm. So when it came out that Simmons' anxiety was causing his previous back injury to flare up, which made him miss Game 4 against the Celtics, that's a real thing. It's not at all uncommon for anxiety disorders to have physical symptoms, whether it's a muscle ache or a full-blown panic attack. And if your stress level is significant enough, it doesn't matter how much resolve you have, any more than it would if you had a torn ACL. Mental injuries can be just as traumatic and damaging as physical ones, even if we can't see them or fully understand them. The conversation around the mental health of athletes has continued to evolve over the past couple of years, and I can't help but think of that as an overwhelmingly positive thing. But whether it's Simone Biles, Naomi Osaka, Calvin Ridley, or now Ben Simmons, it's clear from the discussion around them that there's still an awful lot of work to do. I also can't help but notice that all 4 of those athletes are people of color, but that's kind of another conversation. Maybe we'll have it someday, who knows. In any case, I've always maintained that how we react to situations like these says way more about us than it does about the people we might be criticizing. And how the world has reacted to Ben Simmons has changed my mind on that exactly zero. If anything, it's reinforced the need for people around the sports world to understand mental health more comprehensively, because this is not the last time we're going to hear about it. Mental health is still health, even if it's less obvious than a guy in a boot or a bloody nose or something. And like we just talked about, issues with mental health can have very real physical manifestations, and vice versa, to the point that it creates a kind of cycle that it can take years to break out of. Mental health is complicated, but that doesn't mean our response to it has to be. Treat it like any other injury, and suddenly it becomes a little easier to empathize with. And despite all he's been through, I don't think it's too late for Ben Simmons to turn things around. He's only 25, and hopefully has a long career ahead of him. He's insanely talented, and while he's far from blameless in everything that's happened to him, it seems like he just might need the right environment to succeed in. But talking about Ben Simmons' mental health isn't just for the sake of trying to help Ben Simmons. It's for the next person, and the next person, and the next person too. Hello, and thank you to the whole team out there who stuck around until the end of the video. Ben Simmons is a great basketball player, but y'all are the real all-stars. Conversations like this can get a little heavy, so if you feel so inclined, I'd love it if everyone could put their favorite moment from the NBA playoffs so far in the comments. In the end, we're all fans of the same stuff, and that's what these discussions are supposed to be pointing us toward. We can remind ourselves of that in ways that are a little less serious too, though. If you liked the video, be sure to subscribe for more content like it, and to turn on notifications so you can know whenever I put out an episode. Also, if there's something you want me to cover in the future, put that in the comments too. We've got some really cool stuff coming down the pipeline, but until then, I'm Will, and I hope to see you back here sometime.